Every life has a story behind it. But are you writing the story you actually want to? We're here to explore what it means to live an intentional life that echoes for generations by leaving a better legacy. You can find out more at davidcreyes.com. But now, let's dive in. And I want to take us back today to 2022. Most of us saw on the Academy Awards, or at least we heard about, the slap that was heard around the world. Will Smith got frustrated with something Chris Rock said on stage, marched up and smacked him in the face. And to anybody that was watching, I think most of us saw this moment and thought, this has got to be a joke. This has got to be something they planned in advance. In fact, it's interesting. A lot of the people in the audience who talked about it later said that. They said this had to be a joke. Even Jada actually said she thought this was something planned in advance because it was so unexpected. It was so over the top. It was a moment that just surpassed what anybody thought they were going to experience during that program. But something that's not talked about as much that happened at this same time, right after this slap happened, they cut to commercial. There's a little bit of chaos in the room as everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. And two men, Denzel Washington and Tyler Perry, walked up to Will Smith on the side of the stage. And there's a shot that you can actually look up and see. And they came up to him, they put their arms around him and just counseled him. They heard where his heart was. They recognized that he was hurting, that this was a big moment for him, that he didn't plan this. This was something, an emotional outburst that he didn't expect was coming. And so they're there comforting him and they pray for him. And I think what really stands out to me in that moment is there's a lot of people in that room who saw what happened. And most of them, I think, just like most of us have a tendency to do, we're thinking, I wonder what's going to happen next. And we get into spectator mode. And in spectator mode, we're sitting back watching something happen, watching it unfold, but we don't know what the answer is. We don't really know what's supposed to happen next. We're kind of waiting for somebody else to take leadership. And I think something that's very interesting about the gospel, there's two lessons actually we can learn here from Tyler Perry and Denzel in their response to the situation. The first is you carry the answer. As a believer on this earth, you carry the answer that the world is looking for, the answer that it needs to its problems. Jesus actually said in John 8:12, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. So here Jesus is announcing to everyone, I am the light of the world in John 9. But then in Matthew 5, he says a similar phrase, but it's different. Here's what he says in Matthew 5:14. He says, you are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. So here Jesus is, he comes and he says, I'm the light of the world. I am going to give light to people that are in darkness. I'm going to expose the problems. But also, if you think about being in darkness, means you can't see. You can't see where you're going. You can't see what's in front of you. You can't see what's coming for you. It's a situation of extreme vulnerability. And here Jesus comes and he says, I'm the light of the world. I'm going to bring the darkness to light so that you can walk forward without stumbling, without falling into things, without all of the pain and turmoil and struggle that comes from not being able to see what's in front of you. But then he turns to us, his believers, and he says, you're the light of the world. And Jesus says he's setting us up on a hill. What that means is we are intentionally placed by God in places where we can be noticed, where we can be seen, where what we do makes an impact. And obviously that can be used for good or for evil. We see people who use their impact and it causes damage. They make big failures because they don't take the time to build a secure foundation. And so they have an impact, but unfortunately it's a negative one. But Jesus says we are the light of the world. That means that you've got answers that the world needs. See, something we need to understand about God is he is the God of answers. He's not at a loss when tragedy happens, when bad things happen on the earth. First of all, I think it's a mistake to try to pin that on God. I think it's a mistake to try to take the negative things, cancer, child trafficking, and try to say, oh, that's God's fault. We live in a free world. We live in a world where sin reigns. And those that are under sin are going to live by the consequences of sin. But I believe that God has an answer on the earth. And so often we pray for God to do something, for God to move. And I believe that God's looking at us saying, hey, you're the answer. I put you here to make an impact. I put you here to make a difference. In fact, when you read how Jesus tells the disciples to pray that the Lord would send harvesters, he says, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. So ask the Lord to send out harvesters to go and to reap this harvest. The very next thing he says, first pray for the harvesters to come. And then he says to them, the very next word is go. In other words, you're going to be the answers to the prayer that you're praying. We need to pray. We need to seek the Lord and seek his will for a situation, but then we also need to actively do something about it. And I love that Tyler Perry and Denzel, they saw this unfolding. They saw the pain that Will was in. And instead of sitting back going, I wonder who's going to do something about this, they didn't hesitate to go up and approach him because they knew they carried the answer that he needed. That's the walk that we've got to have. The first lesson to take from this is you carry the answer. That means in your family, in your marriage, in your business, when you see people around you that are going through hard times, God's planted the answer inside of you. Now, we can seek after that answer. It may not always be top of mind. We may not always know exactly what we're supposed to do in any given situation. But I guarantee you, when we take that first step to walk into leadership, when we take that first step to say, I have something here, I can actually bring a solution, I can actually bring life and wisdom. What ends up happening is in that act of faith, God fills our actions with himself. So if I take the step to walk out and try to comfort someone, and try to bring peace, to try to pray for somebody, I may not feel like I have the perfect prayer, the perfect words, but in the act of faith, of moving in that direction toward obedience, God will move. And I can't tell you how often I've prayed for somebody and I didn't feel anything special happening. But for them afterwards, they go, that's exactly what I needed. I can't believe they even say sometimes, how did you know about this? Well, it's not me, it's the Lord. The prophetic and the voice of God actually flows through us when we're willing to walk in obedience. But we've got to know that we're the answer. I'll tell you a situation that happened for me personally that exemplifies this idea. There was my wife and I did 10 months of missions in something called the World Race. It was actually 11 months. And we traveled all around the world. We went to 11 different countries and we spent 3 to 4 weeks in each country just ministering. And at the end of that time, we came back changed. We came back different. But the organization that did this had a reunion. And so they had people from all different years that had done this trip come together. And the idea was to come together and kind of pour into the vision of the ministry and to talk about what was working, what didn't work, how did everything go, how do we continue to build the move of God in this thing. And it was interesting. I went to this meeting in Gainesville and I didn't know what I was expecting, but I walked into the room and we had all of these young people that had done the trips, most of them after me. And they're sitting in this room. There's a whiteboard in front of them. And it becomes this kind of complaining fest. It kind of devolves into just talking about everything that the leaders had done wrong, everything that, of course, what wasn't working. Nobody in the room at that time was talking about any kind of vision for how do we make this better? What could happen in the future? There was just a lot of negativity, a lot of complaining. And I was sitting there watching this, and I could have done two things. I think one, I could have just sat back and said, well, I wonder who's going to do something about this, and just kind of been more passive about it. I think the other would have outwardly appeared the same, but the other response internally would have been, I don't care. This isn't my problem. This isn't my circus, not my monkeys. I don't need to fix this. I'm not the president of this organization who was in the room being talked about. I'm not the one who has the authority to do anything. And I could have pawned that off on someone else. But in that moment, I really felt the Lord rise up inside of me with a vision and with a picture. And I felt like not only do I want to step in and do something about this because I care about this organization, I care about these people, these hearts in the room, both the leaders and the young students who had done this trip. I wanted to be able to bring something. And so I sat there and I asked the Lord, I said, what do you have for this moment? Because this is feeling very, I felt horrible for the leaders who were being just really negatively talked about and just standing off to the side, just kind of listening as these young people talk to each other. But I also felt bad for these students because they wanted something, but they couldn't quite express what it was. So I asked the Lord, I was like, what do you have in this moment? And I felt like he began to download some questions to me. So I went up and I just said, hey, do you mind if I just walk us through some questions and kind of try to lead us into a healthy direction. They didn't mind, they were happy with it. So I started writing onto the board a couple questions, and I just started leading them into where are we now and where is it that we want to go. And what ended up happening was the whole temperature of the room shifted. It shifted from negativity to hope, and it shifted from a place of we don't know anything good about our experience to not only is there good, but there's transformation, there's hope, there's life. And there was repentance in the room as well toward kind of the conversations that were taking place. And I knew exactly how to get us to the goal of that meeting, to get us to a resolution point where we could say, this had a purpose, this had a point, and we accomplished it. That wasn't on me. That was the download of the Holy Spirit because I was willing to believe that I carried the answer. I think in the same way, the Lord's looking to you saying, are you going to be the answer to your own prayers? When you see the world around you, whether you're in business or dealing with things, you might have friends who have marriage issues that you've got an answer for. You may be able to say, like, hey, this happened in my marriage, and it requires some vulnerability. It requires vulnerability to stand up and put yourself out there and say, I've got something to say. And then to share, especially struggles and turmoil we've gone through, and let people know there's a hope, there's a way to get through this. But walking in that kind of vulnerability is exactly what the church is called to do. It's exactly what we're called to do as leaders in this world. There's a saying, I see it on bumper stickers and hear it from pulpits, but it's I'm not perfect, just forgiven. And I hate that because the implication is there's nothing changed about me. There's nothing different. Yeah, I'm not perfect. Of course, I'm not perfect. Who is? But to say I'm not perfect, I'm just forgiven, that word just really fries me. Like just forgiven, like that's all. No, we are transformed into the image of Christ as we behold him. We actually are put up on a city, as a city on a hill, as a light to the world. It says that the old is dead, the new has come. We're a new creation, which means everything that existed in me before, all of the negativity. Listen, so many of us are stuck in our old story. So many of us are stuck in the old me, and God saying, I put that to death on the cross. The whole point of coming to Jesus is not so you get to go to heaven, but so that he puts heaven inside of you. You're a new creation designed to change the world. But we've got to get this. We've got to stop saying stuff like, I'm just forgiven. That's the only difference. Well, if that's the only difference, listen, the world is looking at us, at believers, at Christians, and the world is saying, you're the problem. They're looking at us in every industry, in every area of life, whether it's in politics, in business, in education. The world is looking at us and saying, you're the problem. And if we believe them, then we are the problem. If we don't know that what we carry is actually from heaven, if that what we carry is actually the transformational love of Jesus Christ that cannot help but shift the environment of any room that it comes into, that's what we carry as believers. And we've got to get this into us. We've got to understand that we're not only are we not the problem, but we get to toss off shame and walk as proud sons and daughters of the King who carry the solutions of God everywhere that we go. The other piece, the other lesson that I think that came out of this moment, again, going back to Denzel and the Will Smith situation, is we need to have mentors. We need to have people in our life who pour out into us, who are leaders for us, who give us guidance. I loved that they stepped into this role first of compassion. They stepped into the role of saying, what you're going through is hard, and it's about to get a whole lot harder because it was very public. But we're here for you. We care about your spirit. We care about your heart and your emotions and what you're going through. And they prayed for him. It was emotion. It was encouragement and support. We need that in our lives. I think the second lesson that came out of that moment is the vitality, the essential need that we need to have people who can speak that encouragement and that life into us. I think, unfortunately, we see a lot of people, even recently in the news, we hear about moral failures. We hear about leaders making massive messes. And I think often this happens when we don't have someone who's above us. When you're at the top of the pyramid of your own life, you've cut yourself off from the flow of input and encouragement that could be brought by mentors. But again, what does this require? It requires vulnerability. We've got to be able to say, I'm not all right now. There's struggles, there's things I'm working through. We've got to be able to have mentors and people that we can go to and say, I need prayer, I need input, I need wisdom. This doesn't make sense to me. And that allows the flow of life to continue through us. Because if we're going to be an answer to the world, but we don't have someone else being an answer for us, listen, of course, Jesus is our answer. Jesus pours life into us. We've got to be in connection with him. That's first and foremost. That's the foundation level. But on top of that, God often says the answers that he wants to bring, he brings through his people. That's why we have the church. The whole point of the church is that we are connected, engaged with each other. And as we're connected with each other, we're able to receive life from each other. So if I'm going to be the answer to the world that God has called me to be, I also need to have people that I'm receiving that life from. I need to have people that I can say, this is the next struggle. This is the next hurdle. Coaches, mentors, leaders who can say, this is what I went through, and this is how it connects to what you're going through. And here's what I recommend you do next. Because I know what it's like where you're at, are going to have so much more wisdom and insight and guidance to be able to help us to overcome the hurdles that we face. So as we pursue this idea of becoming the light of the world, being the answer, and finding mentors and leaders who can pour into us what we need to be that. As we do that, we learn how to build something that's long lasting. We learn how to build something on the earth that's going to have eternal impact. It's not just my life and I go to heaven when I die, but we get to actually build the kingdom of God.